Good afternoon. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this latest round of the ABSIP CEO Roundtable series. My name is Kasi Tole, and I'll be the person that speaks in between the important people today. So the important people will be the two panelists and also your views in the Q&A session, and also the guys that will be joining us online. So in between, there'll be my annoying voice just to keep the conversations flowing along. We are going to be together for about 90 minutes, and then thereafter we'll obviously get into the networking session. So I thought I'd just give you a brief background of what the CEO Roundtable is about. The first and most important thing about the CEO Roundtable is that in every venue that we've been to, except today, there's actually been a round table. So today the table is square. I'm not sure how that worked out. Must be a Cape Town thing, but yeah, we usually have a round table to actually anchor the conversation. The second thing that we always try to make sure is that we alert the venue beforehand about what the facilitator of the conversation is going to be wearing. So today he decided he was going to wear a green suit, so therefore the chairs had to match. So at least we got that part right. So the chairs worked out, the table not so much. The big idea behind the CEO Roundtable series is probably something that resonates with Futuregrowth more than any other company, because we know during the very difficult times of a few years ago, Futuregrowth did what other companies were either scared to do or didn't have the balls to do. And that they came out and then they said, we've got a problem with the management of our public entities. So that was the type of courage that is now becoming a bit more common. I don't know if people have woken up many years later to say you cannot sit out these critical conversations as a part of society, but is something that Futuregrowth, championed at a time when it wasn't very popular to champion these things, as we can remember a couple of years ago. In the conversations that we've had so far, it's really been a question of reflections on leadership. We've spoken to different CEOs who've given us different perspectives about how they ended up where they are, and more importantly, what they regard the role of business and the role of their businesses specifically in really getting the country to move forward is going to be. We do know that these days it's very difficult to even map out a future for any of us because we do not know what the rand will do over the next 3 weeks. And if you live in Johannesburg, like some of us, the first thing that you do when you wake up is you check your load shedding schedule, because they do change it regularly. But also, more importantly, you ask the question, who is the mayor today? Because it's important for you to know that if you're going to have a particular conversation, you need to speak to the right person. So a couple of weeks ago, we had Kenny Gunene as the mayor for a few days, and he did some interesting things over that. I think he was in office for about 78 hours. And during those 78 hours, he did the things that he'd been dreaming about doing for a very long time. So it is an important check. From what I saw in the news today, our mayor has gone missing. And when they say the mayor has gone missing, they've just gone through the attendance register and they realized that he's missed about 17 sittings of council in the past year alone. But that's not his fault. I really don't think he's to be faulted on that, because the man was so invisible until he woke up one day and was told that he was the mayor. So that's how we run it in the city of Johannesburg. I hope you guys are a bit more stable here. We've also had the opportunity to then engage a much wider audience. So there's individuals who've been part of organizations, but have never understood where their leaders come from, have never understood how their leaders sort of see and interpret the business. So we also see this as an important reflection point for other stakeholders to say, well, actually, I didn't know how that man ended up in that corner office. I've always wanted it, but I've never known how to get rid of him. So today you make some notes on actually this is what it takes to get rid of Paul. And that's what you need. But also, quite importantly, we found that some people aren't as courageous as they'd like to be. So what we do with the whole hybrid setup is that you get to pose questions. But if you want to ask the question of when are you leaving, and you don't want Paul to know that you're asking the question, just say anonymously. Then I'll pose the question myself, and then we'll get the answer. So we do encourage that participation on the webinar. We've got about 200 people that have registered, which is a wonderful thing for a Monday lunchtime. So I encourage all of them to ask as many questions as possible. And the one thing that people who sit on panels tend to get wrong is that they tend to forget that from the moment they sit here, time is not up to them. So if there are 200 questions that come through, you have to answer all 200 questions, because this is what you sort of have to agree to as part of the setup. So that is what we're going to be doing today. And before then, we'd actually like to sort of give you some insights onto what Futuregrowth is about. So usually, and also your views in the Q&A session, and also the guys that will be joining us online. So in between, there'll be my annoying voice just to keep the conversations flowing along. We are going to be together for about 90 minutes, and then thereafter we'll obviously get into the networking session. So I thought I'd just give you a brief background of what the CEO Roundtable is about. The first and most important thing about the CEO Roundtable is that in every venue that we've been to, except today, there's actually been a round table. So today the table is square. I'm not sure how that worked out. Must be a Cape Town thing, but yeah, we usually have a round table to actually anchor the conversation. The second thing that we always try to make sure is that we alert the venue beforehand about what the facilitator of the conversation is going to be wearing. So today he decided he was going to wear a green suit, so therefore the chairs had to match. So at least we got that part right. So the chairs worked out, the table not so much. The big idea behind the CEO Roundtable series is probably something that resonates with Futuregrowth more than any other company, because we know during the very difficult times of a few years ago, Futuregrowth did what other companies were either scared to do or didn't have the balls to do, in that they came out and then they said, we've got a problem with the management of our public entities. So that was the type of courage that is now becoming a bit more common. I don't know if people have woken up many years later to say you cannot sit out these critical conversations as a part of society, but is something that Futuregrowth, championed at a time when it wasn't very popular to champion these things, as we can remember a couple of years ago. In the conversations that we've had so far, it's really been a question of reflections on leadership. We've spoken to different CEOs who've given us different perspectives about how they ended up where they are, and more importantly, what they regard the role of business and the role of their businesses specifically in really getting the country to move forward is going to be. We do know that these days it's very difficult to even map out a future for any of us, because we do not know what the rand will do over the next 3 weeks. And if you live in Johannesburg, like some of us, the first thing that you do when you wake up is you check your load shedding schedule, because they do change it regularly. But also, more importantly, you ask the question, who is the mayor today? Because it's important for you to know that if you're going to have a particular conversation, you need to speak to the right person. So a couple of weeks ago, we had Kenny Gunene as the mayor for a few days, and he did some interesting things over that. I think he was in office for about 78 hours. And during those 78 hours, he did the things that he'd been dreaming about doing for a very long time. So it is an important check. From what I saw in the news today, our mayor has gone missing. And when they say the mayor has gone missing, they've just gone through the attendance register and they realized that he's missed about 17 sittings of council in the past year alone. But that's not his fault. I really don't think he's to be faulted on that, because the man was so invisible until he woke up one day and was told that he was the mayor. So that's how we run it in the city of Johannesburg. I hope you guys are a bit more stable here. We've also had the opportunity to then engage a much wider audience. So there's individuals who've been part of organizations, but have never understood where their leaders come from, have never understood how their leaders sort of see and interpret the business. So we also see this as an important reflection point for other stakeholders to say, well, actually, I didn't know how that man ended up in that corner office. I've always wanted it, but I've never known how to get rid of him. So today you make some notes on, actually, this is what it takes to get rid of Paul. And that's what you need. But also, quite importantly, we found that some people aren't as courageous as they'd like to be. So what we do with the whole hybrid setup is that you get to pose questions. But if you want to ask the question of when are you leaving, and you don't want Paul to know that you're asking the question, just say anonymously. Then I'll pose the question myself, and then we'll get the answer. So we do encourage that participation on the webinar. We've got about 200 people that have registered, which is a wonderful thing for a Monday lunchtime. So I encourage all of them to ask as many questions as possible. And the one thing that people who sit on panels tend to get wrong is that they tend to forget that from the moment they sit here, time is not up to them. So if there are 200 questions that come through, you have to answer all 200 questions, because this is what you sort of have to agree to as part of the setup. So that is what we're going to be doing today. And before then, we'd actually like to sort of give you some insights onto what Futuregrowth is about.
We're very excited to be approached for the process of the BE partner of Futuregrowth, because this is one asset manager which I've observed for years that has been doing developmental investing, responsible investing, and impact investing long before it became fashionable. Today, when everybody talks about ESG, you realize that Futuregrowth has been doing it before it was fashionable, because they believed in it.
One's got to consider that we are fiduciary holders of other people's money, hard-earned money, if you really think about it. And the savers in our country are a broad cross-section of the average South African, by race, by gender, by social standing. And people increasingly want to know that the people that they entrust with their money look like them, believe the things that they believe broadly. And so it's obvious that our clients want to see that the people who benefit from the income that's generated from the allocation of their capital begins to flow into places where they come from.
The one thing that I'm always jealous about is I'm always jealous when somebody is going to run a conversation that I wish I could run. So when we started putting this program together, we're like, hey, who's going to be doing this program? And everyone was like, hey, actually, at Futuregrowth, there's only one person who knows the business better than most people because her job is to develop it every single day. So Masiabi, over to you.
Thank you, Kaya. Good morning, or is it good afternoon, everybody, and those online. It is an honor and a privilege to have you here in our midst today, and those online. We're really excited to have you with us. I've been given the tough job of introducing Paul Rextro, who is my managing director. Langa said that, he's going to be asking Paul Logoti, when am I going to get a salary increase? So I had to give myself enough days to practice this speech to make sure that it's going to be correct and enlightening so that I can get my salary increase as Langa wishes for me. So in fact, first of all, I'm not really the best person to know about this business more than everybody here, because Futuregrowth, by its nature, we are a business where people here have actually been here for over 20 years amongst me. We've got portfolio managers here. We've got people like Daphne here, Jason, who've been in this business since infancy. So they will tell me whether I've done a good job or not once I've introduced Paul. So Paul Rextro is the managing director of Futuregrowth. Paul joined Futuregrowth in 2000 as a chief operations officer. Paul used to be an auditor at Ernst & Young, and he decided that he was done with the auditing business, and he was approached to actually come to Futuregrowth and help out with the operations for a period of 6 to 12 months. And when he got here, he really didn't want to join the asset management business, to be quite honest with you. He thought that at the time, because you had the old mutuals and the liberties and everybody was so arrogant, whoever was a portfolio manager or CEO of a portfolio management company was so arrogant. And, Paul has been raised by a predicant in the church, very humble person. In fact, I went around to ask people, how would they describe Paul? And, some people were saying, well, he's a humble person. He's very easy to get along with. He's very direct. He wants the best for people. You walk away from a conversation feeling that you've been heard, you've been valued. And he's also very generous with his advice. He will coach you so that you can be a better person once he's engaged with you. So you can understand that having that kind of background and being known as that type of person, to enter an industry full of people who think they know it all, it wouldn't really align with his values. But when he got to Futuregrowth, he decided this was an opportunity, because at the time Futuregrowth was fairly small. So he decided this would be a great opportunity for him and the people who were with him at the time to build something different. A business that would focus on developing people, developing South Africa. And he was convinced that he would want to really leave that legacy. So Paul has got 3 children. Funny enough, one of those children is like a racer. And he's actually studying at the moment in the digital space, digital marketing. And then he's got 2 girls. One of the girls is a doctor, and the other one is a civil engineer, but she's doing her master's in Barcelona at the moment. Paul is an avid family person. He loves his children. He actually does go to visit, and he's been learning how to speak Spanish. Maybe Paul will let you know how that's going at the moment. But personally, for me, Paul has been a great tutor. He teaches me how to be a leader. He's that ear that listens when you speak and gives credible advice. So I just want to say, Paul, I'm very blessed to have you as my boss, and I'm looking forward to relearning what you have to say when you speak to Langa. So Paul, you can come to the stage. Langa Madongo happens to be my other boss, actually. He's a deputy president of ABSIP, and I am a member of ABSIP Women in Finance. So I really want to wish Paul good luck today, because I know he's getting grilled. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Hola, ¿cómo estás? Tudo bem? Tudo bem? Yeah, no, you know, we could have had this whole conversation in Spanish, but we need to include the others. So thank you so much for making time.
Sorry, I didn't get the memo about the outfit,
But
the blending in. I feel like I'm sticking out in the chair.
no, one of us has to be visible in this conversation. But thank you so much, Paul, for making time out of your busy schedule to be with us this afternoon. Markets are open, and some ambassador might come out and say something, and yet you are choosing to be here with us to share your insights and your knowledge. So maybe let me start with my first question, which would be, tell us about yourself. Who's Paul? What do you do? What do you like? Where do you come from? What's your favorite meal?
So, yeah, Masiabi gave a little bit of insight. I grew up, my dad was an Anglican priest, so I grew up in communities, sort of through my childhood. And in fact, I wanted to be an engineer. And in those days, I couldn't get a good enough bursary to be able to go to varsity full time. And they'd always said to me, accounting or engineering is your thing. So I thought, well, I don't have a choice. I'll have to become an accountant. So I remember the lady at varsity telling me, I said, well, how do you get articles? Because I studied part-time, so I didn't actually go to varsity full-time. So I remember in those days, they gave me the names of the big 8 firms. I looked up the names and where they worked, and I thought BP Building sounds like a nice place to go. So I'll join Ernst & Winnie, actually, in those days. I'm showing my age a bit here, not realizing that actually an auditor never spends time in an office. And that was the start of my journey. So I did 5 years articles. When I left articles, in my articles, I enjoyed working with smaller businesses, so more entrepreneurial kind of people. So when I left, I started my own business with a friend of mine, and we focused on providing sort of business and financial advice to people who had great business ideas, but couldn't translate them into business success. And from then on, I went into corporate finance, and then ultimately ended up at Futuregrowth, which you know, my CRB said, I remember when Larry Dippener asked me to come, I was it was a very different industry in those days. And I said, okay, I'll go, but I'll go for a year. And then when I got here, met Andrew, met the team, and actually thought we can create something different. We can actually create something that really contributes positively to society, more than just financial returns. And that was the start of a journey. And if you ask me how long I've been here, I'd say 8 years, because it's changing all the time. New challenges every day. And 23 years now. It's a long time.
Oh, okay. So I think that's a great point to be able to segue into this. Now, how have you managed to achieve the balance between a 23-year career at the top of a magnificent financial services business, whilst at the same time raising a doctor, an engineer, and a digital marketer, and hopefully being at home also to see your better half?
Yeah. It's kind of, I mean, that is one sacrifice. I think running a financial services company, you're either all in or all out. So that is a challenge. That balance is always difficult. I think I was always kind of kept honest. I mean, I have 3 very strong women in my house. So they kind of keep you honest, keep you focused, and keep you kind of on the ground, and challenge you. You can see from their degrees, I think all the intelligence went to that side of the family. They kind of keep you on your toes as well. But I think, you know, it's also about, if I look at what are the things that you're proud of, it's the things where as an organization, you've made a difference. And I'm quite a private person. Not many people know much about me. And I believe in this role, you've got to be an enabler. And the challenge is, as the business grows and as the business adapts over time, you have to keep adapting to make sure that you remain relevant. And I think particularly in South Africa as well as a business. So I try to keep the balance, try to go to my son's races. In fact, I mean, one story, I remember two of my children are born on the same day, 17th of October, if you can believe it, 6 years apart. And I once missed their birthdays because I was on a client roadshow. And it's kind of one regret I have, because they still remember it now. And they weren't that old when it happened. And that's something you can never get back. So maybe some advice for people is always try and keep a bit of a better balance.
So for Kaya, how do you get your children to have the same birthday? But
I can claim no responsibility for that. All what I do know is that my wife tried so hard to try and extend it by a day, but when it happens, it happens. The one good thing is I have one less date to remember, as most men will appreciate. It's
that's
often a challenge.
exactly what Kaya texted me. No, yeah. So maybe then let's go into that aspect again about you. And as you said, maybe not a lot of people know a lot about you, but what were some of the learnings that you've taken from, say, growing up with an Anglican priest for a father, and then at the same time, how did that translate into you being able to stay in one firm for 23 years, when some of us 2 years is quite a time to stay in a single firm?
Yeah. So I think growing up, when you grow up, it kind of instills the values in that in yourself. And I kind of have a view of life. You don't have to agree with everybody all the time, and you don't have to, doesn't mean you must be easy, but every interaction you have with somebody must ultimately be a positive interaction with that person. It doesn't matter whether it's somebody at work, whether it's at the shops, filling your car with petrol, whatever you're doing in life. So that's kind of one motto I've tried to take. The other thing I've learned is that you have to invest in yourself. And I think as we grow older, the reality is markets change, companies change, people change. And how do you remain relevant? So that ability to train, learn new things, and actually be open to new ideas. I think that's probably the one biggest thing is it's very easy to have a fixed view of certain things. And what I've learned in life is that it's about understanding how the whole ecosystem works and actually understanding what the issues truly are. And part of that is personality driven, in that you have to be open to hearing things that you don't want to hear. And you've got to be adaptable. Something that worked last year might have been brilliant. This year will be a disaster. And it's to be open to that.
Okay. So last year.
So one other thing as well is they say the very humbling thing is learning a new language. I'm 59. And I read somewhere that said you need to learn a new language or a new musical instrument after you've turned 50, because apparently it keeps the elasticity in your brain. And I can tell you it's very humbling being in class with 25-year-olds where you feel like the village idiot. So that I'm going through as well. So we'll see. Hopefully I'll get there.
Okay. No, so I was saying last year I had the opportunity to have a conversation with Daphne. And I asked her 2 questions that I'm going to ask you so that she can formulate her answer for this year. The first one was, if you could be a superhero, what would be your chosen superpower? And the second one was, what's been your favorite mistake, the one that taught you the most about yourself and who you needed to be or become?
I think if I could be a superhero, it would be able to change politicians to be good and effective. That would be one thing. What's the one mistake?
What's been your favorite mistake, the one that showed you the most about who you are or who you needed to be?
I wouldn't say a mistake, but I remember talking at an entrepreneurial conference, and we introduced coaching in the organization to try and get a different kind of view, a different perspective. And I discovered mindfulness and actually got a mindfulness coach. And it was an amazing journey and something I regret that I didn't have when I was 18, kind of only discovering it in my 50s. So probably one of my biggest mistakes is kind of thinking those sorts of things are not important to me and not being open enough to them. And a big regret that I didn't discover them a lot earlier. And I'm still only probably 10% of where I need to be on that journey, but wow, that 10% makes a difference. Yeah.
Okay. So now let's come to Futuregrowth. You say you've been at Futuregrowth for 8 years. Can you tell us about the first 8 years when you're here?
I remember, I mean, the first few years were really, really hard. It was the sort of genesis of Futuregrowth was some products that Southern Life had. When First Rand was created, it was kind of the merger of Anglo-American financial services interests and RMB. There were a few products left in Futuregrowth, and it was didn't have a clear strategy, was sort of a bit not really working well. And Larry asked me to come and just spend some time here because he was kind of a bit worried about it. And at that stage, we were barely financially viable. I mean, I think in the early years, if we'd lost a client, it would have been really tough for the business. So it's literally starting from where every little small detail counts. And it was that journey of realizing actually we can create something different. We can create an environment where people can be themselves when they come to work, where you can make a difference through your investments to people's lives. And it was really exciting. I remember we went through a whole culture change. The staff changed quite dramatically to get people who were kind of aligned to that vision. Ketso Gordon was our chairman at one stage. We did the deal with Wiphold, with Gloria, who was kind of very influential on the business in the early years. And literally the journey continued from there. And I think the key thing for us is not to lose that DNA, as the business got bigger. I remember our first client event, we got the clients to meet at Gloria's offices in Harton. We put them on buses, and we had our first client event at Grace Bible Church in Soweto, and most people had never even been there. So it's those little things are little memories of that sort of early journey. But the early part was hard. It took us probably 5-6 years to really start breaking in and attracting new mandates. And I look at the Community Property Fund where people would say, you're crazy. Why do you want to build shopping centers in rural areas and townships? You're going to lose your money. That fund's now 7 billion rand and great performance, making a huge difference to people's lives. So I think it's that it's doing things for the right reasons and not being scared, because that kind of asset management is really hard work. You have challenges you have to deal with every single day, but the results are incredibly rewarding.
And then maybe you can then shed a little bit more light in terms of your transformation journey, where you are right now. What are some of the highlights that you see, and what are some of the areas where you still want to pursue additional transformation?
So I think, the one thing if you'll know, I always say, even if everything's going exceptionally well, you never score more than 60%, because there's always stuff you can do better. So we've been on the journey for a long period of time. And have we done it perfectly along the way? No, we've definitely made mistakes along the way. And it's something I think you have to keep working on. Where we are as a business, we're about 84% of the staff are Black, very similar number, 83% in the investment team. So I think we've made a lot of progress. We've trained a huge amount of people in the industry. Our challenge as well is that we do limited mandates. We do fixed interest and developmental. So for people who have broader aspirations of listed equities, it's very hard for us to satisfy everybody's aspirations. I think the big difference is we started it long before there were charters, and it was a requirement to do so. So I think if you're doing something because you want to make a difference as opposed to ticking boxes, the outcomes are quite different. And it's sort of the learning as you go along in terms of what you need to tweak. You know, we were empowered from a shareholder perspective as well, although the staff was empowered, we were empowered internally. We put staff share schemes in place. We've just done, you saw Cindy on the screen, we did a deal with AIH where they bought a stake in the business, which for me is really exciting because they support the creation of more Black women chartered accountants, which is a incredibly relevant professional field for the asset management space in financial services. So it's been a long journey of focus and attention to get it, and not doing it just to tick an FSC scorecard box. I think, and I think if more people did it with positive intent, it means it ultimately becomes more sustainable. And I think that's what a lot of people are discovering in the industry. But starting it in the early years, I remember people saying to us, like, you're crazy. It's like, it's not important. It's not going to happen. Why have you got these funds? But I'm glad we stuck to our guns and did it.
Okay. So maybe let's go a little bit further into the funds aspect of it, and in particular, the developmental funds. Maybe you can give us a broad overview of what you're investing in, what you have seen in terms of impact on the ground, and how influential Masiavi has been in the success of those funds.
Yeah. So we run quite a few different developmental funds. It's about 43 billion in developmental funds. The big one is the infrastructure bond fund. Jason's here. And that's from literally large infrastructure to the Grace Bible Church deal we did. And I think that's an important thing. You know, you want to fill your funds, and we have this sort of mantle. It's social impacts and financial returns are not mutually exclusive. So it's hard work asset management. And sometimes your small deals can have a huge social impact. It doesn't have to be a large rand amount to have a huge impact. Power debt, obviously, in the renewable space has been critical. Comprop, we've now got 24 properties, 7 billion rand invested in properties, and those properties are critical for the areas they operate in. Often it's actually the only thing that works. About 2 years ago, we got a new board, which is kind of the investment committee for Comprop. And I said, you know, to be able to be effective, you've got to understand how these properties work. So we took them on a tour to go and see some of the more rural properties. And an example would be, you'd be driving along, the tarred road isn't there anymore. It's actually pushed to the side because it's better just to drive on the gravel because of the potholes. You'll get to the town, the municipal offices, the grass will be growing taller than the windows, and there'll be the shopping center, which is working, it's effective, supporting the local community, supporting the schools. It has water, electricity, it has sewerage. And I'm going to forget the one. I was chatting to, we also provide space for hawkers. And I was chatting to this one lady, she was quite an old lady, and she was selling 5 tomatoes. And she wanted to give me the one, and it was about 10 o'clock in the morning. And that's kind of very humbling. You know, you look at these people who have been badly let down by the country in terms of the areas they operate. They expand their houses by building their own bricks, and they have a right to a proper service and something that they can be proud of. And sadly, I think it's often the private sector that has to provide that. And I think as allocators of capital in the investment space, it's a really heavy weight we have to take on our shoulders in this industry. Yeah. And the development equity fund we run, which is private equity, they do a lot of early stage kind of investments. HereX, Yoko was a key thing. I mean, think of a difference Yoko has made to SMEs. Yeah, so it kind of goes deep. I think it's the DNA that's built into the organization. you want to make a difference through your investments, not only a financial return.
Okay. Maybe let me then take you a step back and let's talk about Grace Bible Church. Why the investment and how did that pan out for you? Yeah.
So it was a great investment. In fact, I think probably one of the reasons my CRV joined Futuregrowth. So maybe, I mean, Jason's far more qualified than me to talk on it, but I'll give you a very short summation. Basically, it was a church, very large in Soweto, turned down by all the banks for funding. And we looked at it and we thought, actually, a church is a business as well. You have to have controls in place. What is your source of income? How does it operate? And I think the recognition that in Soweto, it ultimately became far more than a church. It became a refuge. It became a training center. It became a youth center. And that's why we invested in it. And actually, it was a great investment. You know, we got all the debt funding that we made to them. And sadly enough, they don't need us anymore. But that's a good thing. That's called sustainability.
Yeah.
But it's just it's the analysts and the investment team going into it with a different mindset. But it's a lot more harder work than just giving a normal kind of commercial loan, because you kind of had to structure it and guide them and mentor them to make sure that call it the business of that church was investable.
Okay. So I think in the video, Sis Cindy mentions how in the South African context, you're always a leader in ESG, impact investing, sustainable investing, et cetera, et cetera. Globally, we're seeing some of the big houses step backwards, retract some of the commitments and undertakings they had made. How are you viewing the aspect of sustainable impact and ESG investing? And how much do you see that as being a part of your future?
I think the difference is a lot of asset managers signed up to things because their clients were asking for it, but they didn't really believe in it and they didn't know how they were actually going to implement it. So I think that's an important point. I think for us, we have real debates. Is do you fund coal? And the answer was no. You know, Andrew was in the press recently again, being very clear about kind of where we stand. I think the difference is because of running funds that have a strong developmental impact, it's kind of built into the investment process. Whereas I think a lot of people are having to take and invest in existing process and try and tack it on at the end. And you know, in the listed equity space, if you've got a fund manager that really likes a share and the ESG person is going to tell them they can't buy it, that creates a whole kind of different dynamic. Whereas I think for us, because of the way the team works, because we do a lot of unlisted stuff, we've built that entire investment process over time, including the governance elements where, you know, pricing on deals is affected by and can improve if as an organization, as you grow, the governance you build in around the quality of your auditors, the compositions of your governance committees, you can actually get cheaper funding. And that's kind of like, that's real ESG on the ground kind of happening and helping bring about change.
Okay. Load shedding, interest rates rising, gray listing, probably there will be a red list and we'll be on it. I've always wanted to be on the blacklist after watching the series, but let's park that for now. With all those elements, right, in the melting pot, are you bullish on South Africa as an investment destination? And if so, why?
You missed out a whole lot of things as well. Transnet, rail, ports. I think I'm always bullish on South Africa because it kind of gets into your skin. That's kind of why we're all here. I asked somebody else, one of our portfolio managers the other day, I said, are there any own goals the government hasn't scored yet? And he couldn't think of one. You know what? It feels like it's getting a lot darker. And you know, I think before it was always easy to find these kind of threads of light that we could hang our hats on. But I think as South Africa, we're very good at coming from the abyss and coming back. And I hope and I pray is that we can do it again. But I think that will come from the private sector as opposed to government. And you see the harsh reality of trying to run businesses. I mean, we run agri-funds. You know, our ports, I think Cape Town's rated is the best, 347 out of 351. PE's 348, and Durban's 349 out of 351 in the world. I mean, that's scary. And it's been happening for a long period of time. You know, we look at our road infrastructure and logistics. How can we be competitive as a country if that doesn't work? I think Transnet now transports 20% of the containers to Durban Port. It used to be 80%. So it's just this long litany of stuff where things are spoken about and commissions are done and all sorts of, but actually nothing happens. There seems to be a lot of talk and no action. And for me, that's incredibly frustrating. How do we expect to be, and the reality is we are competing with the world. Think what we like, but sitting in South Africa, we are competing with all the other countries in the world. And the way supply and demand goes, it'll go to the easiest place. And it just makes it so much harder to do business now. And you see the reality in our investments, the challenges of not having electricity, not having logistics, you know, impacts on pricing, volatile exchange rates, you know, and everybody talks about a failed state or kind of a mafia state. We just pray it doesn't happen. But some things I think need to change dramatically for it not to happen. And the private sector's got an important role to play there.
Okay.
But it's worrying. It keeps me awake at night.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't want to add to the list to depress you more, but
yeah, no. Okay, so now we sit here, Future Growth. Masiabi mentioned that there are people who've been here over 20 years, which is as long as I've been alive. But what are we doing as Future Growth to ensure that the young people who are here today are here in 20 years' time? How are you evolving and adapting to what the world has become to ensure that the talent stays and that new one comes in?
Yeah, I think firstly, I read a book about 3 times called Founders Mentality, and it's kind of the risk that founders have on an organization, and when is the right time to be here and when is the right time to leave, and actually are you creating an environment for people to grow and prosper? And we've built a successful business over time, but that all becomes relevant because actually it's the next 20 years. And what we leave behind is ultimately for the next generation of leaders in the organization. So I feel I spend quite a lot of my time trying to create space for new ideas and people to look at things differently. I think that's one critical element. Work from home is a good example, you know, kind of call it old people's views of how things work, because that's how it worked historically, and the current environment is irrelevant. We've gone through a whole we're busy going through a whole culture change program from war family culture, which kind of works when the organization's small, but when you become larger, you need to adapt it to what we call a caring high performance team. And it's quite interesting. You can see different things move at different paces in the different parts of the organization. So we kind of talk about future growth as a whole, but different parts move differently. And for me, what's been exciting is adding additional people to Exco, new blood, people with new ideas, and actually giving them the space to be able to make a difference and bring their magic to the organization. Because actually that's what the future is about. It's less about us older people in the organization. And I think also adapting, you know, what does the organization need to look like from a strategic point of view? You know, we probably need to have more capabilities, you know, as opposed to only doing developmental and fixed interest, because we've kind of grown quite big in that space. And and South Africa's only, the market size is only that big. So it's those kind of conversations and strategic conversations we're having about the future of the organization.
Okay. And then maybe more broadly, what do you think we need to see in the broader financial services space in South Africa to make it competitive with the international markets?
I think the one challenge is only operating in the South African market is ultimately probably a limitation for a lot of firms, because it's only a certain size. And I think we've seen with time how there are lots of exciting new players coming into the market. So I think international focus is probably important, because the reality is that's the world we play in. And when we invest in companies, they're often international, they rely on their growth for internationally as well. I think, like in our space, in the credit space, things are moving all the time. You're reliant on government's enabling of investment in infrastructure. If that's not happening, what does that mean for your business and the ability to invest? The way the banks operate have a huge impact. I think the challenge as well is investing when you can't determine the exchange rate, specifically given the changes to Regulation 28 now. It's very hard to form a view of what's going to happen. It really depends what somebody's going to say at a specific point in time. And unless you've got a genie, you're not going to know that. So there's that element as well. I think the key thing as well is provide training for young people to get into the industry, because it's quite a hard industry to get into. And I think when you're in it, it's quite a hard industry to get proper training and gain experience. And I think it's about creating those opportunities as well, and then making sure you also create those opportunities for people to stay or move. It's okay, as long as they stay in the industry and you're expanding the talent pool in the industry. I think that's really important.
Okay. And then the last one around the issue of transformation before we move on to the next set of questions. AIH, how has that relationship been, and how has it been having a private equity fund as a partner?
Yeah, it's actually been great. I think, ultimately AIH will buy, the private equity fund has a smaller component. Ultimately, AIH will buy that from them. And that journey was interesting. I mean, we loved having Wiphold as a partner, and Wiphold, they did fantastic things with rural women. Just kind of quietly got on it, didn't shout from the rooftops, but they knew what it was like to run a small business. So they were fantastic shareholders. And we've been having discussions with Mutual and with Kai for quite a while around, finding another shareholder. And to their credit, they said, go for it, and you can choose your own partner. And if you can't find the right partner, you don't have to get one. And I've seen in companies, if you have the wrong partner, sometimes it's better not to have a partner, because it can impact your business negatively. So we went through a whole journey of looking, and it's been fantastic. I think their DNA, what they've done in their own history, is really, really important. It's, as I said earlier, what they're doing is so relevant for the financial services industry in terms of increasing the talent pool. And I think Cindy, in her own way, in her own history, has a strong affinity to the DNA of Futuregrowth in terms of making a difference, standing up to things that are not right, whether it's in SOEs, as you mentioned earlier, or private companies, whatever, and being brave to do that. So it's gone well. And I think, in terms of their private equity fund, I think there are things that we can do and help them with as well, which is also fantastic. So it's been a great partner. And I think it's fantastic to be challenged by somebody who comes from a different perspective as well, in terms of, they're building up that business as well. So it brings that different perspective as a new investor in the business. And it brings a responsibility, because, they've bought into the business, and I look at Cindy and I think I've got to meet your expectations. So that extra pressure is also good.
Okay, so now let's once again talk about South Africa. This is one of my favorite questions. Obviously, we know that next year is an election year. And if someone asked you who you choose to be a deputy president, you choose me because I've got experience. But
I told you the vote's in. But and with that color suit, I mean, really, huh?
So, but if you became president and first 100 days, what would be your 3 main priorities for the country?
I think the number one priority would be to get people in place who are competent and really want to make a difference and improve things. A public servant is called a public servant for a very good reason. And I think sadly, people have kind of forgotten that. I saw a very funny, I think it was TikTok, somebody sent it to me. I've forgotten the guy's name. He's absolutely brilliant. He spoke about this cabinet. I don't know if you've seen it, and he calls it about this old cabinet, and he's got a few arms on the top, which he kind of relates to the arms deal. You've seen it. And then he talks about all these old 30 cabinet things, and they're like old candles, like short candles, and they're kind of all old and ineffective. I thought it was it's quite true. I mean, for me, I would want people in place who are actually going to work to make a difference. And it's about the bigger country. It's not about political agendas or self-service or whatever, all the things that go into people's minds. And maybe it's a massive simplification, but I think without that, if we have that, we at least have a fighting chance.
Okay. Next two. Next two
three.
priorities.
So
yeah.
it was 3 things. For me, through all the difficult things that we go through as a country, it's the most vulnerable that suffer the most. It's the most vulnerable that suffer with the healthcare system. It's the most vulnerable. I mean, you look at what's happening with cholera. I mean, that is an absolute travesty, and we should actually all be hanging our heads in shame that can happen in our country. So for me, it's about effective departments and effective municipalities. You know, I mean, a significant number of municipalities that are actually not even ineffective, they're kind of dysfunctional. And we see them through I gave you one example earlier of areas we invest in. That affects the most vulnerable people. And those are the people we need to protect. So it's about sorting out actually how getting the municipalities working effectively. The reality now is that the functional municipalities are the ones that are probably ultimately going to be able to produce their own power and all that sort of thing. And then what are we creating in the country? You're fixing one area, but you're actually just creating more inequality. And at the end of the day, unless you've got economic growth, you're not going to be able to fix the problems. The government coffers are only so big. You look at the impacts of load shedding, lower resource prices, tax revenues are going to go down. It's a scary financial spiral if that does happen. Okay. So municipalities are number 2. Number 3. Definitely put you in as president.
Yeah, okay. I'm not sure if I like number 3, but okay.
My other thing would be the sorting out the judiciary and the way all that works. I think, given the history, the fact that nobody ever gets held to account, I think without that, you don't have the strong sort of persuasion to keep people on the straight and honest roads. And I think if people are held to account and pay for corruption, I think that's part of the way of helping clean up society, for people to work for the bigger good as opposed to their own good.
Okay. At this point in time, I'll open up for questions from the floor. Anyone who's currently in salary negotiations, this is not the platform.
We've just had salary increases, so it's okay. I'm old. I would have forgotten by the time the next one comes around.
I don't know if there are any questions from the floor, questions from online.
There's a lot of questions from the floor, but people are very shy. See, told you.
We need to make it interesting. But I need to be a cabinet minister before I ask my question. Is that fine?
I'll give you my superpower.
All right. My question relates to you gave us stats on 82% are Black staff. And what's the granular allocation and their levels in terms of where they are within the company? I think that would be very interesting.
So if you look at the investment team, 64% of our portfolio managers are Black, and I think 29% are female. That number needs to improve. If you think that 56% of our staff are female in the organization. In terms of, if you look kind of across the organization, in terms of kind of who run the different areas, who Black, it's HR, compliance isn't, our enterprise solutions as it is, our chief operating officer is, our IT is, our dealing desk is, our interest rate team is now, our property and agri fund is, our development equity fund is, trying to work around the office, who have I missed out? Finance isn't. Yeah, so I think, and business development, Masiavi. I have to say one thing about Masiavi. When she first joined us, it was like a lot of was on Teams. And I always thought Masiabi was 6'4" because she comes across as this powerful presence. And when she used to come to the office, I used to say, Masiabi, what happened? Yeah. So I think, I mean, and the key question is, you know, I'm 59 now. So who ultimately replaces me? I think with time, that's a kind of a key question. But if I think across the main areas, I think we've made good progress. Am I happy or satisfied? No, because I think we can do more. And the nature, different areas of different parts of the business moves at different times as well. So we had Vickers and Michael retiring, and they've kind of both been replaced. So we kind of are getting to that stage of the organization as well.
Next question from the left one. I'm sorry, they don't want to ask, so I have to ask. One of the most difficult issues that we've dealt with is the silence of big business as a country was being looted to the ground. With the exception of that statement you issued in relation to ESCOM specifically many years ago, there has been this idea of silence diplomacy in that business will engage with government behind the scenes, and we never know whether they actually do confront them about how the country is being looted to the ground. It looks like there's been a change in that approach in relation to the fact that because the president is invisible, it doesn't matter whether we're going to engage with him behind the scenes or in front of the scenes, he just doesn't engage at all. Now, for a lot of us, there is also a level of skepticism around how business could sort of stay silent for so long. Is it simply a matter of it's now suddenly hitting their bottom line, so suddenly they think that the country is in crisis? Because if you go and speak to the people on the ground and activists, the country's been in crisis for a very long time, and we haven't heard the voice of business until now. Why now?
It's actually a very good question. I want to go back to that period in 2016 as well, and maybe just give a little bit of insight into what life was like at that stage. We were hit with lawsuits. We were threatened with all sorts of things. We lost a huge amount of money. We lost a huge amount of funds. It cost us hugely taking that stance. There were security concerns. We had weird break-ins into the office. And remember, it was at a time before the Tilly Madonsela report was out. It was at a time where a lot of stuff wasn't actually that public yet. So it was hard and it cost us. And do we regret it? Absolutely not. Our one big disappointment was how silent everybody was. They literally kind of left us to hang out to dry. And I think so maybe that comes then to your part of the question. One, corruption doesn't happen without the private sector. Okay, and I think people talk about government being corrupt and tenders and all that sort of thing. It doesn't happen without the private sector. And that's sort of the silent thing that happens in the background, and that needs to be dealt with. For companies that do facilitate corruption, they should be held to account, and there have been very few that have been properly held to account. I think given the size of business and maybe the way government operates, people are scared of losing business, so they keep quiet. And the reality is we lost billions in mandates that were pulled from us. Sadly, or not sadly, but the reality is a lot of the people that were attacking us are the very people who turned out to be kind of the most, or fingered as being the most corrupt. I do think people start speaking up only when it starts hitting their bottom line. And I think they probably only start speaking up once it starts hitting their bottom line a huge amount. It was interesting. I went to dinner recently with a diplomat, and it was quite interesting to hear how diplomats work and diplomacy works and all that sort of thing. I guess the question is, does it really work in our environments? And it probably doesn't. I think it's one thing, but I almost feel that when people stand up now and talk about it, it's kind of ignored. I'm not sure government really reacts to it or does anything differently, because I don't really see anything differently happening. And I guess that's worrying. I think before you used to get more of a reaction than now, and that's concerning. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Sure. Questions from the left wing. That's it.
Hi, afternoon. Thank you for the insightful afternoon. I have a question on your views on retaining female talent in the industry. Earlier, you spoke to how you are trying to grow the talent pool within asset management. So as a leader within your organization, what are the steps you've taken to facilitate a culture where you're not only introducing more female talent into the industry, but you're retaining it?
They say you empower a woman, you empower the nation. That's kind of the first point. I think as financial services and asset management historically has always been kind of a male-dominated industry. And if I look in the organization, we've got a lot of very senior females in the organization. Are we where we want to be? I don't think so. I think it's understanding. So there's lots of things, like there's maternity leave policy and all that kind of stuff that you have to create an environment where people can still be a woman. They can build up, they can have a family, and being able to manage that family effectively and be able to work effectively. So I think that comes with flexibility. It comes with being open to different ways of working. And I also think it's about the environment that you create in the organization. It goes to the culture. And women often have different but very powerful insights. And in a male-dominated kind of environment, those can get lost. And I think for women, that makes it really hard to work and be effective in those organizations. So those are the kind of things you need to focus on, but it's very people dependent on the people that you have in the organization as well. And, how can you change people that are not that open? Yeah, so to me, it's something you have to continually work on, as in it's about embracing diversity, whether it's religion, race, sex, views of the world. It's about creating an environment where people are open to learn and take the best from all those different elements, knowing that ultimately you're creating a better organization. That's kind of the way I look at it. And I think the other thing is being targeted on your employment in terms of actually creating the space, because I think if you're in an organization and there's 100 people and 3 women, it's going to be very, very hard to potentially find a place, depending on the culture of the organization.
Okay, I have one last question that's been sent to me via online, which is to say, how are you thinking about helping small emerging financial services businesses to also overcome the hurdles which you experience? Do you mentor, do you support them financially?
So it's kind of multifaceted. So in terms of brokerage, I think 75% of our brokerage goes to Black-owned brokerages. So that's kind of one way of helping. With kind of multi-managers, it's about trying to help them financially with fees or co-investment opportunities to help them grow their businesses. And a lot of it is actually through who we invest in. So what we can invest in is driven by the mandates we have with our clients. So if I think of retail capital was one of our big investments in the development equity fund, I think they've helped something like 43,000 SMMEs. It's the Gauteng Partnership Fund. So it's investing in those different things which have a kind of a positive knock-on effect. The same with the property fund in terms of the number of local people you employ, local suppliers. It's creating opportunities for people to grow their own business and ultimately better themselves. So it's kind of multifaceted through investments, supporting other financial services firms, and through the kind of investments we make that have a positive knock-on effect. And I think the key thing is actually about measuring that knock-on effect, and we actually measure that. I think Angie is here somewhere. She has 1 million stats on those sorts of things.
Okay.
We have a question from online. My name is Mpho Hlaguti. Well, not mine, the person online, obviously.
I was going to say that was quick.
Quite a search. I'm from Bloomberg News, and my question is, what are the managing director's views on the 254 billion rand Eskom debt relief bill, and whether this is enough to address Eskom's debt, or what can government do differently?
I'm probably not quite the right person to answer that. Probably Olga is, but I think maybe a more general comment. You can't, if you're solving Eskom's debt issue now, it's now. What happens tomorrow, in a week's time, in a month's time, and in a year's time? You know, the way Eskom runs and operates needs to be changed fundamentally to actually build a sustainable business. So it's not only about solving the current debt problem. You know, the energy problem, it's not only about the supply of power. I think it's only 2 provinces. I think most of the provinces actually have no capacity left on their grid. So even if you put more power into it, it's not going to work. So that whole thing of splitting Eskom as well, there's been a lot of talk about it, but nothing's actually happened. Yeah, and my worry is, as we go down the line, the pressure on the fiscus is becoming harder, not easier. When you saw the paper this morning, the minister is concerned about kind of a drop in tax revenues. You have to solve the way the whole business operates and actually get it efficient, root out the corruption. Yeah.
Okay. I think, unfortunately, we are out of time. Yeah.
Got a follow up here and another question.
So I feel like I need to again add to the answer to your question around females in the business. So, I mean, we've got a graduate accelerated program that we run, and within that program, we've had quite a lot of women come out of that program. In fact, Daphne should be the right person to sort of add to this. So Daphne, whatever I miss, please do add on to it. So in this organization, we're very intentional about growing talent. So, you know, Daphne and the people in the investments team do need to actually take you through what it is that they do so that you can be better prepared to take up the positions that are readily available. I mean, and it's not only that. I mean, if I look at some of the areas where we manage money, a lot of the people that actually sit underneath that are women. So if you want to talk about like succession planning as well, there are representation of women that can take up space within the investments team. I mean, Paul has said we could do better, and we are intentional of actually doing better in that area. But I mean, I look at all the women that are sitting in this room today. I mean, Felicity in the HR space, we've got Rukeya in the legal space.
Dr. Felicity, right?
Okay, yes, who's going to be Dr. Yeah. I mean, we've got Adele in the marketing space. You know, my team is predominantly women-based. So, you know, we are actually quite intentional about developing women within a future growth. And in fact, we've got a lot of women that have been strong in future growth that have been poached by other businesses as well. So it's because we are that intentional about actually training women and male, but I'm just saying to your point around women, to make sure that everybody who takes up position is actually qualified for it. So this is definitely a good place to be in if you want to develop as a woman. Daphne, I don't know if you want to add on to that. Okay, sure.
Yes. Okay, cool. There's another question from Anonymous. I think it's Anonymous. The question is, earlier on this year, well, it's not Anonymous, I'm not Anonymous. Earlier on this year, we had a conversation about how the president was downlisting the grey listing process. You know, it's just like, oh, we're just learning a lesson. And a lot of us are concerned about the fact that if it's being downplayed by the president, he's not the president who's going to then champion the fixing of the system. Similarly, we seem to be gravitating towards the same conversation around the concept of a failed state. Now, when you look at the construction mafia, which is from KZN, where I'm from, we create, I apologize for everyone. The construction mafia, for example, you mentioned a number about Transnet. It's actually now down. It's 20% capacity because 80% of the infrastructure has been stolen. So every single day, in fact, they even have like a timeline now. So in the evening and in the morning before 9, that's when all the cables disappear. So these are things that are now obviously crippling the country's logistics infrastructure. If you look at what happens or doesn't happen at Eskom every single day, it depends on which version of the story you hear, but we cannot dispute that something has seriously gone wrong there. So the sum of all those things are essentially translating to a state that has lost the capacity to deal with the things that it should deal with. And a lot of people are saying, no, you can't say there's a failed state, but I don't believe the people that say that there's a failed state are people who are saying, actually, the lights shouldn't be on. It's perhaps people who are saying that let us, sound the alarm bell in advance to say, until things are done differently, we need to be able to fix this. So until obviously something is done differently, I do think that the idea for a failed state is inevitable. What is your view? That was from Anonymous.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's right. And it's like, you know, everybody, and on the electrical front, everybody talks about a grid collapse. Actually, the problem is before the grid collapses, when it's only on 1 hour a day, because nothing can function. You know, your sewage, your water, all the kind of basic stuff is not going to be able to work. So, I mean, I think it goes back to my previous comments is what, and it was actually your question, Langa, if I kind of have 3 wishes, what could you do? Something like that needs to happen to change the trajectory, because the trajectory is not positive. In fact, I can't think of many positive things. And the grey listing was a good example. We're already feeling the impact of that. In terms of it's so much harder to do business with international players at the moment. And that's the reality on the ground. So I agree. What is going to change the trajectory? And are we a bit like, what's it? You put the frog in a kettle or something? I'm not sure what, I'm bad with analogies. It kind of doesn't feel it until it's too hot. You know, are we, sometimes I think our optimism and sort of loyalty to the future sometimes not a good thing, because maybe we let things go too far before there needs to be serious change.
All right. Another question before Langa kicks us all out?
Yeah.
Hey, yeah. I felt like that hand was daring to come up. Your hand. Okay. I think we are done with the questions from the floor. I do not have anything else online, so back to you.
Yeah, thank you. On that note, thank you so much, Paul, for making time. I want to start something new that we have not done at the other roundtables because there's a beautiful scenario. Before it starts raining, can we all go outside and take a group picture of everyone who attended the roundtable? Anyone who's wearing the corporate colors can stand in front. Those But once again, thank you so much, Paul, for making time. Thank you for having this conversation with us. And thank you to everyone who's here in the room. I'll hand over back to Kaya to do the vote of thanks before we go to the group picture.
No, pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. So it's one of those awkward moments where as an MC, you start off and then you introduce everyone and then everyone also comes after you, starts to do the introduction. So usually I tell people that I'm the only one who gets paid to introduce people. So you just go and talk. So similarly here, it was very clear that I was going to do the vote of thanks. How many times did he just say thanks in the past minute? So no, that was my job. So now I'm out of things to say, but thank you very much to the Future Growth team that has actually enabled us to put this event together. We are much grateful for that. And also to the ABSIP team that got us here. The logistics worked well. They threatened to fly us in at 6 a.m. And then I said, I don't think I'm allowed to fly at 6 a.m. because when you wake up and there's no electricity, you can't see anything. So we managed to come in the day before. And also we're very grateful to the members who have been logging on religiously to these roundtable events, even when the table is not round, and giving us some particular insights, because I do think that it informs our collective awareness about the issues that matter most to the country. And of course, I do have to confess that I did beat one of your records. I quit EY on my second day. I just couldn't, I couldn't stomach it. You know, you get on day one and then they tell you that for the next 3 years, you're going to do this in auditing. I was like, no, that's not going to be me. And once I left EY, I went to your other organization. So I walked into Laurie Dippener's office. So I'm not saying that's what's going to lead me to run Future Growth one day, but it just looks like
You
the
never
stars
know.
are
You never know.
aligning on that front. So thank you very much, Paul. Yes.